The real exorcism that inspired The Exorcist. In the winter of 1949, a quiet American neighborhood was about to witness one of the most disturbing stories in history. It began inside a modest home in Maryland, where a 14-year-old boy named Roland Doe lived with his family. Roland wasn't extraordinary in any way. He was a shy boy, polite, curious, and deeply attached to his Aunt Harriet, a woman fascinated by the supernatural. She owned a spirit board, a simple toy by appearance but one that opened doors better left closed. Aunt Harriet often played it with Roland, teaching him how to speak to spirits. The boy didn't understand what he was inviting. When Harriet died suddenly, Roland was devastated. He kept her spirit board, believing he could talk to her again. That night he tried. He called her name, waited. The board spelled something out. A simple word. Hello. At first he thought it was working, but within days things began to move on their own. The scratching started on the walls of his bedroom, soft at first, then louder, as if claws dragged across the wood. Objects slid across the room. Furniture rattled without warning. The family heard footsteps in the attic, even when no one was there. Roland's mother thought it was grief. His father thought it was childish imagination. But the sounds grew violent. Each night, they came closer. And then, Roland began to change. He stopped eating. He slept with the lights on. His once gentle voice became harsh, impatient, filled with words no 14-year-old should know. When his parents prayed, he cursed. When they played hymns, he screamed until his throat bled. The family called doctors. They ran tests. Nothing was wrong. Physically, the boy was fine, but his behavior was not. One morning, his mother entered his room and froze. Words were carved into his skin, fresh cuts forming the word hell. She dropped the water glass in her hand. The boy looked at her and said, "He's coming." No one knew who he was. As the events worsened, the family turned to their church for help. Father Albert Hughes, a young priest, was assigned to investigate. When he first met Roland, he described a presence that chilled him to the bone. He sprinkled holy water on the boy's forehead. The reaction was instant. Roland screamed, his back arched, and the bed began to shake. His voice deepened, muttering Latin phrases he couldn't possibly know. Father Hughes held his cross tight, praying aloud. Suddenly, the crucifix flew from his hand, slamming against the wall. The voice coming from Roland's mouth said only one thing: "He is mine." The priest left terrified. That night he requested permission from the church to begin an exorcism. The ritual was carried out in a small hospital room in Georgetown. Witnesses said the boy's behavior defied logic. His body contorted in ways that broke human limits. His eyes rolled back. His voice changed between growling and whispering. When the priest tried to restrain him, a bedspring snapped and sliced Father Hughes's arm open. The exorcism was halted. The priest barely survived. Roland's parents were left hopeless. Doctors called it hysteria. Psychiatrists called it possession syndrome. But none could explain why the boy spoke fluent Latin, or why the word evil appeared carved on his body during prayer. Finally, the family was advised to take him to St. Louis, where a team of Jesuit priests would take over. Among them was Father William Bodern, a calm, steadfast man who had seen war, but never something like this. The priests began the ritual in secret, keeping detailed notes of everything that happened. Those notes still exist today. Each night, at the stroke of midnight, they prayed over Roland. The prayers would begin peacefully. Then the growling would start. The boy's voice would mock the priests, calling them by name, revealing secrets about their pasts. His eyes burned with rage, and his strength was unnatural. He spat at them, cursed the cross, and screamed the name of Christ in hatred. Every time Father Bodern said, "In the name of Jesus I command you," Roland's body would thrash and the air would grow cold enough to see their breath. One night, witnesses said the mattress rose from the bed. Another time, the boy's body was lifted and thrown across the room with no visible force. When they restrained him, he broke the leather straps like paper. During one session, words appeared across his chest as if carved by invisible hands. The priest saw the letters form one by one. Spite. After hours of fighting, the boy would fall silent. The room smelled of sulfur. The priest would leave, drenched in sweat and fear. They performed the ritual every night for nearly a month, and every night something new happened. Crucifixes bent, furniture moved. A low growl followed them through the halls. The nurses in the hospital refused to enter the room alone. The boy was no longer the same. His eyes were hollow, his voice broken, but somewhere deep inside, he was still fighting. Father Bodern noted that during brief moments of clarity, Roland begged them not to stop. He said, "He'll win if you leave." The priest promised they wouldn't. But one night, the demon spoke again. This time, it named itself. The voice said, "I am the devil." The priest didn't believe it was Satan himself, but something powerful enough to make them doubt their faith. The exorcism reached a violent peak. Holy water burned Roland's skin. His back arched so far it seemed his bones would snap. His screams echoed through the corridor, heard even outside the building. Nurses described a voice that was not human, more like an animal trapped between worlds. At dawn, he would collapse, exhausted, as if nothing had happened. The priests kept going night after night. But the entity seemed to grow stronger. Father Halloran, one of the younger assistants, wrote later that he began to question everything he believed. He had seen death in war, but this, he said, was something older than evil itself. Then, something unexpected happened. During one of the final sessions, the words, "Exit," appeared carved into Roland's abdomen. The priests took it as a sign that the demon intended to leave, but where it would go, no one knew. They prepared for one last ritual. That night the candles flickered. The prayers began. The boy's body shook violently, and his voice screamed, "He won't let me go." Father Bodern raised the crucifix and shouted, "In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, I command you, leave this child." Roland's body stiffened, his back arched, his mouth opened wide, and a scream erupted so loud that it shattered a nearby glass. Then everything went silent. The real exorcism that inspired The Exorcist. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. The air felt thick, heavy, alive. Roland lay motionless, his chest rising and falling in short, shallow breaths. The priests stared, waiting for the next sign. Then slowly the boy opened his eyes. They were clear. No rage, no hate. For the first time in weeks they saw the boy, not the thing inside him. But before anyone could speak, Roland's body convulsed again. A growl rose from his throat, deep and guttural. His mouth twisted into a cruel smile. The voice that came out was not his. "He will never be free." The room erupted. Candles went out. The window shattered inward, scattering glass like knives. The priests shouted their prayers louder, their voices overlapping in panic and faith. Father Bodern pressed his crucifix against Roland's chest. The boy screamed, arching his back off the bed. Then he fell still again. For hours, the priests continued, their voices breaking, sweat running down their faces. Every time they thought it was over, something else happened. A chair sliding across the floor, the bed shaking, the boy speaking in voices that were not human. One moment he was crying for help. The next he was laughing, mocking their prayers. The session stretched into April 1949. Each night the priests entered the room knowing they might not come out the same. Their hands trembled, their eyes were hollow, but they kept going. They believed they were fighting for a soul. And then, on the night of April 18th, something changed. It began as every night had. Roland thrashed on the bed. His voice growled curses. The room temperature dropped to freezing. The priests began their prayers. But then Roland's body stiffened and his voice changed. Calm, almost childlike. He said, "Saint Michael." The priests froze. The boy's voice continued, louder this time. "Saint Michael, protect me." Suddenly his body began to convulse. The priests prayed harder, calling on the Archangel Michael, the ancient defender against evil. Witnesses said a brilliant light filled the room, brighter than any lamp. Roland screamed one final time, a sound that seemed to shake the walls. And then, Silence. The boy collapsed. The light faded. Father Bodern leaned over him, whispering his name. Roland's breathing was steady. His face was calm. He looked at the priest and whispered, "He's gone." The exorcism was over. The priests left the room in silence. None of them spoke for several minutes. They simply sat, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Father Bodern later wrote that the peace in that moment was so complete it felt sacred. The next morning, Roland woke up asking for breakfast. His voice was soft, weak, but normal. He said he remembered nothing of the last month. He said he'd had a dream that a shining figure with wings fought a dark creature and drove it away. The family left St. Louis quietly. They never spoke publicly about what happened. The priests, bound by confidentiality, kept their notes hidden for decades, but the story spread through the church, whispered among priests and believers as proof that evil was real, and so was deliverance. Years later, a writer named William Peter Blatty, a student at Georgetown University, heard about the case from a Jesuit professor. He was told of a boy who had been possessed and of priests who had fought for his soul. The story haunted him. In 1971, Blatty turned it into a novel, The Exorcist. When the book became a film 2 years later, it shocked the world. Audiences fainted in theaters. Some refused to finish the movie. Others called it blasphemous. Yet what few realized was that behind the fiction was a very real boy, whose screams had once echoed through a hospital room in 1949. The church never revealed Roland's true name, only that he went on to live a normal life. He married, worked, and stayed far from the public eye. He never spoke of what happened, not once. When asked in later years, those close to him said he refused to discuss it. He was terrified that speaking of it might invite it back. Researchers and skeptics have since tried to explain the case. Some say it was a psychological breakdown, a boy traumatized by loss and stress. Others believe it was hysteria shared by the priests and family. But there are details that remain unexplainable. Latin phrases spoken by a child who never studied the language. Physical marks appearing under observation. Objects moving without contact. One psychiatrist who reviewed the original church notes decades later admitted quietly, "I don't know what it was, but something happened to that boy." Father Bodern never performed another exorcism. He continued his ministry but avoided the subject whenever possible. Those who knew him said he carried the memory of that room until his death. Even the younger priest, Father Halloran, who later became an army chaplain, admitted in interviews that while he tried to rationalize it, there were moments he couldn't explain. He said, "I saw the boy levitate. I saw the words appear on his skin. I can't call that anything but real." The house where it began was eventually demolished. The hospital room in St. Louis was sealed off for years, yet locals still whisper that strange things happen there. Cold spots, flickering lights, untraceable sounds in the walls. The legend lives on because it represents something that frightens even the most rational minds. The idea that evil can take form, that belief can open doors we cannot close. The case of Roland Doe became more than a story. It became a warning. A reminder that faith and darkness often walk the same road. The Exorcist movie turned those events into art, but the truth behind it remains far darker. Behind the special effects and screams was a boy who once begged for help while something ancient spoke through him. Decades later, the church still acknowledges the case in private. Officially, it remains unexplained. Unofficially, priests who've read the original documents say it changed how the church viewed possession forever. Today, when someone asks if the devil is real, those who know this story give the same answer. They don't say yes. They don't say no. They say, "I've seen what happens when you call his name." And somewhere, in the quiet halls of a hospital long forgotten, there are still scratches on the walls that no one has been able to clean away.